Magnificent Russian and American warships are making their last passage to India.
Ship for demolition! Ship on!
These dinosaurs of the Cold War are heading for the biggest scrapyard in the world, Battleship Beach.
Delivery Pakistan, India in July.
Here, thousands of workers risk their lives to turn these aging hulks into precious metal, while in London, shipbrokers count the profits of another demolition deal worth millions.
Just on the market. Make an offer urgently, please.
40 Minutes, Battleship Beach, Thursday, 9:30, on 2.
Jane Corbyn invites MPs Julian Critchley, John Biffen and Austin Mitchell and political columnist Alan Watkins behind the headlines at midnight. But before the witching hour descends, here's Tracy McLeod and BBC2's Monday Late Show.
Read my lips.
On the Late Show tonight, 3-second culture, the tyranny of the soundbite on American TV news. The Nasty Girl, a film that lifts the lid on small-town Germany's Nazi past. And the superstar from Senegal, Youssou N'Dour, plays live in the studio. Good evening. The National Union of Journalists went to the House of Lords today in the latest stage of their campaign against the government's restriction on the broadcasting of interviews with members of named terrorist groups. The case has spotlighted once again the dilemmas that television and radio journalists face when trying to report on Northern Ireland. Few people have more experience of the problems than BBC reporter Peter Taylor, who has made more than 50 programmes about Ireland, including last year's trilogy Families at War. His latest film breaks new ground. The Maze, Enemies Within, is the first time that cameras have been allowed inside the once notorious H-blocks of the Maze prison outside Belfast. It's remarkable not just for the picture it paints of life on the Republican and Loyalist wings of the jail, but also for the way it tells its story within the current reporting restrictions. Peter Taylor explains.
Why did they let you in? Well, that's a question that my producer Steve Hewlett and I were most frequently asked, and it was certainly put to us most pointedly and suspiciously by the prisoners themselves when we first began our research on the wings of the H-blocks early this summer. They couldn't understand why the Brits would let the BBC into the maze.
And I wish I was back home in Derry.
The answer is deceptively simple. The authorities are proud of their prison. It's no longer the hellhole of Republican mythology in which prisoners are brutalized and humiliated, nor is it a strange ways in which prisoners are banged up 2 and 3 to a cell for most of the hours in the day. 10 years after the hunger strikes, the prison department thought it was time that the world knew this, and in particular, the prisoners' communities. Remarkably, we were given unrestricted access to the H-blocks, allowed to film whatever we wanted and talk to whomsoever we wanted. The only area off limits was prison security. For nearly 2 months, we virtually lived on the wings until we became part of the Republican and Loyalist furniture. In fact, the only restriction we did face in making the programme were those imposed by the government's broadcasting restrictions, but these were at no stage an inhibition. They are restrictions, not a ban. They coloured none of my questions to the prisoners, nor their replies to me. It was only when we'd finished putting the film together that the BBC took stock and considered where and how the restrictions had to be applied. Well, the area is nothing if not grey, but the restrictions themselves are quite specific. We can't broadcast a person's voice if he is deemed to be speaking as a representative of one of the listed organisations, or if the words invite support for them. This can create absurdities. Here, the prison's catering officers are discussing a problem with the IRA spokesman on food.
The thing about the sausage rolls, they're getting smaller in terms of size and all that there, you know.
Although the restrictions were not designed to silence discussion about the size of sausage rolls, they had to be applied because the sequence involves the IRA spokesman on food, clearly speaking in a representative capacity. But 5 days after the restrictions were first introduced, the Home Office agreed an exception with the broadcasters. If a person was deemed to be speaking in a personal capacity, not a representative one, the restriction need not be applied. The hunger strike sequence is a perfect illustration of that distinction.
We, my 6 comrades, are prepared to go through with this, and we are prepared to die to prove that we are special prisoners.
Things like your eyes, your focus in your eyes started to go. Moving from the bed, wanting to go to walk or go up and watch TV, just became a thing you didn't want to do, you know.
There, the historical film is restricted because McCartney is clearly speaking as a representative of IRA hunger-striking prisoners. His contemporary reflections on his state at the time are not, because they are spoken in a personal capacity. Most of the interviews broadcast in the programme are not restricted, because the BBC deems them to be personal reflections in response to my questions. But whatever the absurdities and ironies, the restrictions are an unfortunate fact of the broadcaster's life. We only hope that they don't inhibit discussion of a remarkable prison with a remarkable regime, neither of which would exist were it not for the political situation in Northern Ireland.
Peter Taylor's film, The Maze, Enemies Within, goes out as an Inside Story special tomorrow night at 10:20 on BBC1. The word soundbite was coined in America. Roughly speaking, it describes whatever fragment of a politician's speech or interview happens to end up in a nightly TV news bulletin. The classic example was George Bush's "Read my lips, no new taxes," a phrase perfectly formed for TV consumption, which has since returned to haunt him. Some critics contend that soundbite journalism has taken over in American TV news, that political discourse has been reduced to rapid bursts of speech which are becoming so short as to be meaningless. From New York, Tom Brooke reports on the shrinking soundbite.
81. Okay. Got it. We got speed. Get up to speed on MG1.
You give us 22 minutes. We'll give you the world.
This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening.
In order to give you the world in minutes, the American television networks have compressed sound bites, blocks of speech and news reports to just a few seconds.
Special session or not, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committees announced tonight they will hold hearings to investigate the president's apparent shift from defense to offense.
That's a different military mission. It raises a lot of questions.
Questions that for the first 3 months of this crisis, Congress...
Settling his brother's estate will be easier than proving that Jack Ruby acted alone in Dallas 27 years ago.
I think everybody remembers what they were doing that day.
Jim Cummins, NBC News, Dallas.
I'm looking for Cuomo's victory speech on this tape.
Rewind, please. What you want to see is him walking out. Rewind.
Most Americans get their daily news from one of the 3 nightly news programs produced by the big networks. Sound bites in these programs have dwindled dramatically.
Flag sales are doing well, and America is doing well. And
Kiku Adato, a Harvard sociologist, measured the sound bites of presidential candidates broadcast by network news programs during the election campaign in 1968, and then again during an equivalent period 20 years later, in 1988.
One of the most striking findings of the study was that there was a dramatic decline in the amount of time candidates could speak without interruption on television. In 1968, the average soundbite was 42.3 seconds. By 1988, it had dropped to 9.8 seconds for the presidential candidates.
I've been listening to young people all my life. I was young once myself, whether or not you think so.
It wasn't unusual in 1968 for a candidate to speak over 1 minute on the network evening news. In 1988, it never happened. Sometimes in 1988, the presidential candidate in a whole week didn't get that much time.
The main charge against short sound bites is that it reduces public discourse to its simplest, that it can corrupt the political process.
Unless he convinces the electorate that everything is bad in America, Well, I think some people don't have health insurance that can take care of their own needs, so I don't know the answer to it, no. Flag sales are doing well, and America is doing well, and we should understand that, and we should appreciate that.
These George Bush sound bites were edited together by Kiku Adato for her research into what she calls America's soundbite democracy.
America is that shining city on a hill because we're a nation of dreamers, a compassionate nation.
I am not a card-carrying member of the ACLU. I am for the people. He is for gun control, and I am not.
He thinks our best days are over and that doom and gloom is around the corner.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Looking forward to answering questions. Not here, though. The one in this race who wants to strengthen law enforcement.
This is all an American viewer tuning in each night for a week to one network news program would have seen of George Bush speaking in his own voice during the 1988 presidential campaign.
They heard little slogans, read my lips, no new taxes, that he was for the American flag, that it really just sounded like a bunch of advertising slogans.
I think it's a bad thing because it means, in fact, that what people are being injected with or being continually confronted with in the guise of information are essentially these emotional cattle prods, these things which are designed to create primarily emotional responses rather than intellectual responses, designed to encourage people to take sides without on issues or on policies without necessarily understanding those issues or those policies. And I think at that moment, the very notion of citizen begins to give way to the notion of consumer.
Television advertising has pioneered the rapid use of media imagery. Take this 30-second commercial designed to promote tourism in the state of Massachusetts. It contains more than 100 edits.
Every Friday in November, MTV Street Party takes over.
MTV, which shows rock music videos aimed at boosting record sales, has also quickened the pace of American TV. Network news divisions have adapted their style, shortened their sound bites to make their product, that is, their news stories, more attractive to the key 18 to 34-year-old demographic group, the MTV generation with high disposable income favored by advertisers.
In the half-hour newscast where you have basically 22 and a half minutes, I don't think you're looking for a lot of subtleties. I think you want to get the facts and get them out there and get the interpretation and get them out there. I don't think it's our job to be subtle. We are not documentary filmmakers. We are in the daily news business.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Those words were written with the help of Peggy Noonan, a talented presidential speechwriter who worked with both Ronald Reagan and George Bush.
Read my lips, no new taxes was policy. That's why it made such an impression on people. It was serious policy, and it was policy that everybody understood and took very seriously. That's why it has been so dreadful for him since he changed his mind. Look, if there were no such things as sound bites, which is to say if there were no such thing as TV, we'd all be reading newspapers, and the subhead under Bush gives acceptance speech, the subhead, second or third subhead would have been candidate vows, no new taxes. It's news. That was a policy that was news. So it was totally legitimate that it was a very famous soundbite.
It's an appeal to emotions, which, number one, draws on a famous line of American mass culture, read my lips, the words of Clint Eastwood in the Dirty Harry films. One of the ongoing arguments about George Bush when he was running for president was that he was a wimp. To use a phrase like read my lips is injecting a whole iconography into a few words. It has nothing to do with policy. It has nothing to do with anything but image making.
I think the opposite is true. I think when that most of these sound bites, as you put it, come from his acceptance speech, when for once he sat down and decided he was really going to tell people what he thought and why he thought it and what his plans were. And the fact that people found that memorable suggests to me that for once they finally understood him and finally got him. I think that's why, as a matter of fact, the speech was a success. So, And the fact that, of course, it comes down to sound bites. America receives its political leaders through TV. It has to come through sound bites.
These people who get elected governor.
The other main charge against soundbite journalism is that it tends often to limit airtime to those who deliver the best-sounding quotes, not necessarily the most informed.
It's a problem in American journalism where the same handful of experts are quoted over and over again. You can look to a couple of people in Washington who are quoted 90, 100 times a year on the network news because they've mastered the art of the soundbite.
It's a boost in a couple of ways.
Norman Ornstein, a political scientist at a Washington think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, has become one of the most quoted men in America. Computer printouts from the video libraries of television networks show he's appeared hundreds of times on their news programs, giving sound bites on everything from foreign policy to political reform.
I learned you don't go like this, and you don't go like this, and you don't speak loud and then speak soft, and that you come to the point. And I found more and more that I was getting called by people from, say, the evening news shows who wanted not a broader historical analysis, but 3 seconds.
You know, you got to figure out how to be a soundbite professor. I think what gets, you know, it really sort of is about the degradation of thought at a lot of levels. That's one of the impacts. And the second impact is that those people who lay out arguments and who feel that a kind of more contemplative approach to issues or policies is a way of understanding them, or who even merely want to express something biographical or autobiographical about their own lives, which isn't easily translated into a soundbite, go unheard.
I think you could argue that this is one of the reasons that people have been turned off to politics, is that it does become a choir of pundits, of professional politicians and hangers-on, and people in this class of people who say the same thing at the same time about the same issues, oftentimes with the same sound bites.
Stephen Hess, a senior fellow at another think tank, the Brookings Institution in Washington, has also appeared hundreds of times as a television soundbite. He confessed in a newspaper article that very often soundbite journalism can perpetuate a less than truthful view of reality.
What happens is more often a producer will call and will ask for everything I know about congressional hearing that's to start on Thursday. And I'll discuss it with him, and he will then say, well, may I send a camera crew around, or I'll get back to you. Of course, if he says he'll get back to me, he never does. That means that somehow I haven't said the magic words in this sort of a pre-testing that fit into the mosaic, my little chip in the mosaic that he's constructing as his story or as his package.
Doesn't this kind of activity then encourage rather dishonest journalism?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It would be dishonest research and it's dishonest journalism. It's not untruthful necessarily. If the hypothesis is true, then the story will turn out to be true. But if the hypothesis is not true, then there's nothing in the process of getting the story that's going to disprove that hypothesis.
The image makers in the White House have also learned how to manipulate TV news producers with sound bites.
When I went to work at the White House and was writing for and with the president, with President Reagan, I was acutely aware of what New York producers would do to that speech in terms of cutting it into sound bites. After all, I had done what they were doing for a living. So I was aware of it when I was writing for President Reagan. And I used to, just for fun, whimsically, go to my boss and tell him which sound bites I thought would make the evening news, if indeed the speech made the evening news.
They know what they're playing to. I mean, they know what's going to be used and how it's going to play. So, I mean, these are professionals who are saying, okay, what are we going to get on the evening news tonight? Where's the quote? Let's make the quote. Let's get our quote across. And every day they went out there and they tried to get their quote across. And we, of course, put it on.
Don't you feel you're being manipulated
Sure.
in a way?
But we're being manipulated by everybody. We're being manipulated by ideas. We're being manipulated all the time. But that's okay.
But does it really stop you getting at the substance of what's going on, the truth in a way?
Now, what is the truth? I mean, he said, read my lips, no new taxes, then he raised taxes, you know.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
The real problem here is that if at one time, I mean, coming out of the Enlightenment, the notion of the truth and the seeking of truth was the idea of people becoming informed and seeking out knowledge about their world, increasingly in the world of the soundbite, the truth becomes that which sells.
Just the facts, ma'am. And after all, the facts are on our side.
Tom Brooke reporting. One of the highlights of the current London Film Festival is a new film by the German director Michael Verhoeven called The Nasty Girl. The film won a Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival earlier this year and won a standing ovation at its London premiere last week. It tells the story of Sonja Wegmus, a star pupil and respected member of her community, who finds herself suddenly facing violent opposition when she tries to research an essay on the theme, My Hometown During the Third Reich. But she presses on regardless and finds not only herself, but her family fighting to survive. The film displays a distinctly comic touch in the way it handles this potentially solemn tale. It is in fact the true story of Anja Rosmus, author of 2 books on the Nazi heritage of her hometown in Passau, in Bavaria. The Late Show talked to Anja Rosmus about the film, her researchers, and her life in Passau.
Wir waren eine vorbildliche Familie. Mein Vater durfte bei der Heiligen Messe immer vorbeten. Und wenn er dann da vorne gestanden ist und alle Leute haben ihm zugehört, dann war ich immer stolz und glücklich. In der Schule war ich sehr gern. Ich bin in die Klosterschule St. Anna gegangen. Direkt gegenüber, da war das humanistische Gymnasium für Knaben, St. Emma.
Ah, vom deutschen Scheiß Fernsehen!
It's really close to my real life, but the film shouldn't only show my private situation, it should also show a typical German situation, and it's a typical one.
Good morning, ladies.
Good morning, Sister Leontina. When I began, I couldn't imagine which problems are waiting for me, which problems I would have to manage in the next few years.
Grüß Gott, Fräulein Juckenack.
Grüß Gott. Grüß Gott. Ja, wollen Sie was mitessen? Oh nein, das ist doch nicht nötig. Komm, Nina, Robert, Stuhl gedeckt. Ja. Die einen bitte nicht klar.
Sie hat erzählt, dass der Herr Bundespräsident einen neuen Aufsatzwettbewerb ausgeschrieben hat. Thema, der europäische Gedanke.
Gibt es denn kein anderes Thema?
Doch, aber meine Heimatstadt im Dritten Reich.
Das ist ein schönes Thema. Das nehme ich.
Okay. Meine Heimatstadt im Dritten Reich. Was wollen Sie denn da schreiben?
Ja. Wie die Stadt sich gegen den Nationalsozialismus wehrt. Vor allem die Kirche. Ah, da kann man viel schreiben.
Sehr lobenswert.
I was very beloved by nearly the whole community. The bishop, the mayor, all these men were friends of my family in former times. They became my enemies. They became enemies of my family.
Am nächsten Tag habe ich gleich angefangen, Bekannte und Verwandte zu fragen, die die Zeit erlebt haben. Zuerst war ich beim Onkel Franz.
Wir haben natürlich im Internat nicht viel gemerkt von den Nazis. Dann hat es plötzlich geheißen, den Pfarrer Schulte haben es eingesperrt. Dann haben sie ihn aber wieder laufen lassen. Aber er ist immer wieder in seinen Predigten gegen die Rassengesetze eingetreten.
Concentration camps, anti-Jewish boycotts, Aryanization, annihilation. All this was planned by an inhabitant of my hometown and published in the year 1920.
Onkel Franz hat gesagt, wenn du was Genaueres über den Pfarrer Schulte wissen willst, dann gehst am besten zum Professor Juckenack. Das ist der mit dem 50-Markschein. Der ist nämlich der Leiter vom bischöflichen Archiv, unter anderem, weil er noch viele andere Ämter hat. Ich bin also ins Kirchenarchiv, im erzbischöflichen Ordinariat gegangen.
It seemed to be unbelievable in 32 or 33 to build up a concentration camp or something like this. We in the South, we have had anti-Jewish boycotts since the year 23. We have had the big suits at law court between Nazis, famous Nazis, and Jews. We have had all these things, you know, 10 or 15 years earlier than other cities. But no one ever published these facts.
Recht?
Na, ich finde nichts Gescheites.
Was hätten Sie denn gern Gescheites finden?
Naja, zum Beispiel über den Bürgermeister Zumtobel.
Na, das ist unter vertraulich abgelegt. Das dürfen wir nicht herausgeben.
Ich brauch's aber für meinen Schulaufsatz.
Da müssen Sie sich die Genehmigung von der Witwe vom Zumtobel holen.
Und die Frau Zumtobel hat mich im April 1979 hierher bestellt. Ich habe mir gedacht, vielleicht hat sie ja noch die Akten von dem Prozess, den die Amis nach dem Krieg ihrem Mann gemacht haben.
Sie sind das. Sie wollen von mir die Einwilligung, dass der ganze Schmutz und die ganzen Lügen über meinen Mann noch einmal breit treten
Ja, ich möchte nicht über die Lügen schreiben, ich wollte nur die Fakten irgendwie.
Mein Mann hat 6 Jahre im Arbeitslager zugebracht. 6 Jahre und ist aus Gram gestorben. Das sind die Fakten. Und die anderen haben sich tot gehen lassen nach dem Krieg. Das sind die Fakten. Und jetzt schauen Sie, dass weiterkommen.
Entschuldigung, ich wollte nur einen Aufsatz...
Aber schnell!
I found out a lot of such cases with an enormous difference between what them published and what had happened in reality, especially in the Catholic Church. It's a very close society. About 97% are Roman Catholics. I think they are hating me for my doing. The whole city, not only the picture of the city, but the whole city indeed is under the Catholic Church.
Die Rolle der Kirchenväter damals? Wir sind sehr betroffen.
2 priests told us publicly, we risked our life for Jews. I found out after a short time that exactly these both priests denounced Jewish people.
Das ist eine unglaubliche Frechheit. Sie wissen genau, dass die amerikanischen Behörden von der Klage Abstand genommen haben, weil es sich gar nicht um die Lebensmittelkarten oder so etwas handelte, sondern dieser Mann, sei er Jude oder nicht, war ein Betrüger. Fragen Sie Pater Brummel. Das ist ja der andere Geistliche, den Sie hier in den Dreck ziehen wollen.
Nur wegen dem Herrn Pater Brummel habe ich die Namen nicht sagen wollen.
Der Pater Brummel hat auf Ihre Trauung die Orgel gespielt. Sie sollten sich schämen.
I am extremely isolated since these 10 years. In former times, I was very close to the whole society in the community. I am hated in general and very aggressive hated. Very often, I was threatened. Tomorrow, you should be murdered. You should be murdered, and also your children. Such letters were belonging to my everyday life. Indeed, a restaurant in which I should speak, posters published it, was destroyed, totally destroyed by neo-Nazis.
Menschenversuche.
Den haben sie aber nicht eingesperrt. Den habe ich noch rumlaufen gesehen, bis er gestorben ist.
Aus gesundheitlichen Rücksichten, da schau.
Maria!
Also, wir gehen dann jetzt.
Komm aber nicht so spät.
Several situations are not only dangerous, not only serious, but ridiculous. And I believe if the audience should follow the story They must be shown, such moments. They are belonging to me.
Weil ihr die Hosen voll habt? Weil ihr Angst habt, was ich sonst noch aufbringe? Bitte, sonst seid nein, will ich still!
Wirklich alle
Das ist doch gerade, was die wollen! Aber merkst du denn das nicht? Bitte stellen Sie den Aber darauf falle ich nicht rein! Den Gefallen tue ich euch nicht! Seht ihr ab, schieß! Ihr wollt mich umscheißen! Ihr wollt mich ja gar nicht ehren! Stumm soll ihr werden! Das Maul soll ihr halten!
Ja, bitte.
Ja, und das hältst jetzt auch! Undankbare Person!
Der passt doch die ganze Richtung nicht in diesem Land.
Ja, dann geh doch in die DDR! Leck mich doch am Arsch! Das ist doch meine Heimat! Meine Heimat! Bitte! Ihr Arschlöcher! Ihr Arschlöcher!
There are several serious reasons to stay in this town. 5 years ago, in '85, in my neighborhood, a former concentration camp guard fired on a Jew. No one word was published in one only newspaper. Nobody discussed about this event. Nobody gave help to this old Jew. I think such events belonging to our everyday life, indeed, must be published. These people must be given help. I know when I'm leaving this town, there's nobody instead of me to do all these things. There wouldn't be anyone to publish what has happened in these our days.
The Nasty Girl opens here in January. A superstar in Africa since the late 70s, the Senegalese singer Youssou N'Dour first came to prominence in the West when he sang on Peter Gabriel's So LP, and then joined Gabriel, Bruce Springsteen and Sting on 1989's Mammoth Amnesty Tour. N'Dour's remarkable vocal style is rooted in the griot tradition of West Africa and is clearly influenced by Islam. Yet his respect for Senegalese tradition and rhythms is combined with a fascination for Western pop forms. Nowadays, N'Dour frequently makes different versions of records for different markets, and while he has occasionally come unstuck in his attempts to combine his Western interests with the music he makes in Senegal, his latest LP, Set, has been hailed as a triumph. Last night, Youssou N'Dour and his band Super Étoile de Dakar delighted a crammed Hammersmith Palais. Tonight, they're here in the studio.
Gudi, masu gude, didi mana konto, masu gude, wow, yeah. Khalil, riumi, ni la ko bëggee, wow. Bismillah ñuy detti doon dellu sàkku ñaan di ñaan yàlla mu nangul nu lépp luñ ko ñaan seytaan ni di yàq xel di sotti xalaat di féewale àndandoo ñun dal nu laal yéen Xaaleel réew mi ni laa ko bëggee waaw seen at mi moo di atim gone yi soxlawul ñuy bare wax nan ci ma booloo te wan mag ñi ñooy doole réew mi ku ne bu tàggoo ay waajuram di sug ñoom ca njalbeen fu mu ne si àdduna sañ ca yaakaar lu baax yaay yéen Xaaleel réew mi ni laa ko bëggee waaw man daal wàllu wi ma féete maa ki samay gaay pexe mu ne ñi ngi koy gém ngir sunu réew mi naat sunu bëggee sunu réew mi naat danoo war a booloo te kat fu waay mën a ne sañ caa def lu baax yaay yéen Xaaleel réew mi ni laa ko bëggee waaw caatul caat kenn demul nga des kenn warul lay jooy loo way leen caat Xaaleel réew mi ni laa ko bëggee waaw set setooy set lu naa la ni bés dina ñëw musicien wër àdduna musique soxlawul frontière ni bés bésoo yi bés seetlu naa ko ma yokk di la dooleel gis ko setoo yi ni set sa biirooy ni set sa yaramooy ni setlu sa àndandoo yi ni set buñ ko defee ni set buñ ko deful ni setoo yi setlu naa la ma yokk di la doole bis ni bés dina ñëw américain yi am gis-gis yu bees waa Rësël ki seen neen ndax xeex bi dafa metti ni bés yàlla na ñëw africain yi ñëpp àndandoo gànnaay yi dafa bare te xeex bi dafa metti ki koy suuxat moo ko sooke ni bés bésoo yi seetlu naa ko ma yokk di la dooleel Give me your hand, keep me from just to know what do you think for the future. Xale yaa ngi jooy mag ñi leen tiitaloo di moom ma diis yee Give me your hand, keep me from just to know what do you think the future. Xale yaa ngi jooy ëllëg a wóoru la di moom ma diis yee